Welcome to the Rich Outdoors, where we break down the tips, tactics, and strategies of hunting's greats to not only help you become better hunters, but to motivate and inspire you between hunting adventures. For more about us, including additional resources on our guests and links to everything we cover in the interview, check out therichoutdoors.net. Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to another episode of the Rich Outdoors podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by GameCallSupply.com. Game Call Supply not only has the best hunting calls on the market, but they have all the resources to help you master the calls and become a better hunter. If you're looking for blacktail calls, Game Call Supply is your place. They have the exact point-blank calls that today's guest, Scott Haugen, uses to kill world-class blacktails every year. This guy is a blacktail killing machine. And if he trusts point-blank calls, then so do I. They also have blacktail doe estrus. Don't get caught using whitetail doe estrus because they didn't have any of the blacktail left. Get some Wayne Carlton's blacktail doe estrus. It's what I use and trust, and it's worked great for me from everything from trail cam pics to bucks following me clear to stand. Use the Rich Outdoors coupon code TRO at checkout to get 15% off your entire order. Today's episode is with a familiar guest to the podcast, Mr. Scott Haugen. Scott was on back in April and chatted about bear hunting. Scott is a wealth of knowledge, and he's written all kinds of books on hunting. He's traveled the world hunting and filming, but you got to start hunting blacktails. And blacktail hunting, for anyone who has done it, is a love-hate relationship. And in Scott's opinion, one of the hardest big game animals to hunt. And with that challenge comes the obsession that we all know and love. Scott is by far one of the most successful blacktail hunters out there and has hunted them in just about every terrain that they call home in his attempt to master blacktail hunting. In this episode, Scott shares with us some great tips and strategies on what he has learned over the years, but in no way does this podcast even scratch the surface of mastering blacktail hunting. Scott has a great book called Trophy Blacktails, The Science of the Hunt, and I recommend any hunter of really any level check it out, and you will pick up some great advice, not only on blacktail hunting, but all types of hunting. This is a great episode. I hope you guys enjoy it, and let me know what you think. Hey, Scott, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
You're doing good, Cody. Thanks.
So it's, the middle of blacktail hunting and middle of the blacktail rut. Have you got a chance to get out and do some hunting?
I've done a lot of hunting. Haven't done a lot of locating or I should say, seeing in the daylight or any killing. Well, I guess we got our younger boy, Kasdan. He's 13. He got a nice little 3-point this year earlier, but we've been on to some big bucks, and it's the big blacktails that really intrigue me. So my wife and I and older son have been going out pretty regular. We live up the McKenzie here, so we don't have to travel far to hunt. But we've hunted just about every evening and a lot of mornings. We're putting in a lot of hours, and we have 2 good bucks, 1 exceptional buck we've been after for 3 years. Have yet to see him in daylight, but I'm catching him on trail camera every single night. So he's there. He's just got to make a mistake.
Yeah, that's blacktail hunting, though. You don't always see something every time you go out, and it's a love-hate relationship.
Oh, it is. Yeah, people just don't realize, how tough these deer are, and all the years of doing TV and writing and speaking around the country, and when I'm traveling throughout the West here, Pacific Northwest in particular, a lot of people ask, gosh, why don't we see more blacktail hunts on TV? And when in the height of my TV days, it would take me about an average of 3 weeks to get 1 blacktail shot. Where I could go in virtually any Western state and crank out a mule deer show or a whitetail show in 1 or 2 days. It's just these deer and their nocturnal habits and the thick habitat they live in. They're no question. They're, especially if you're looking for a good trophy class animal, the toughest animal to get in North America. They're challenging.
Yeah, you always hear the argument that whitetails are the toughest, but I don't think those guys have ever spent much time trying to catch a blacktail.
No, it's not. It's interesting. You look at a lot of the whitetails that are dying and how many, pictures are taken in daylight. Then you go back and look at a lot of the big blacktail bucks that are killed, and a lot of those pictures are taken in the dark because those bucks are killed literally in the last 5 or 10 minutes of daylight. And by the time you recover them, it's usually dark. So you look at that, and I love whitetail hunting. They're a lot of fun, but you look at the habitat they live in, and the sheer numbers of whitetails, and how many are crammed into such small areas. Their density is a lot bigger, and you take a very whitetail-like animal in the Columbia blacktail and throw it into our Coast Range or Cascades, or even the river bottoms, here that we have in Oregon, Washington, Northern California. And it's tough even seeing a deer, and it's crazy. I know you've done a lot with trail cameras, and there's nothing more humbling than putting a trail camera out and really learning how many big blacktail bucks are out there that you never even see.
Yeah, there's a lot and then you'll see those pictures or trail cam pictures, and virtually zero of them will be in the daylight unless it's, right about now in that prime rut. Pretty rare to see a trail cam picture of a big blacktail in the daylight.
Yeah, it is. This one buck we're after, I know exactly where he lives. You can't get into it. It's too brushy, and I don't want to spook him out. But we've been on him for 3 years now, and I have well over 1,500 trail cam photos of him, and not one is on daylight or in daylight. And a lot of them are, right when I leave the woods, and he's honestly 5-7 minutes behind me. Goes back into his bedding area, 10 minutes before shooting light, and he's there, and it's an every single night thing. It's not a just happenstance thing. It's really intriguing when you target one big buck like this, and I've been fortunate to take a lot of record buck blacktails over the years. But getting after one buck like this, you learn so much about him. I mean, this thing has multiple trails, and I might catch him on one trail with the camera one night, and he might be 200-300 yards away, on another trail the following night. So he's, bedding in the same area, but the use of multiple trails that these things have, and when they travel and where they travel is so intriguing.
So most of the bucks that you've taken over the years, are they one buck you're looking for, or are you hunting a particular area that generally holds good bucks? I mean, where's the focus for you?
That's a really good question. It's the most frustrating hunts have been where I've found one big buck and then focus on them, where it might take you a couple years, even more, in hopes of finding that deer. Honestly, quite a few of them have come in areas where I know there are big bucks, where I'm targeting a big buck, and then another one walks into the area, whether it's pre-rut or peak of the rut, and it's like, that's a 130-inch, 140-inch buck. I'm not passing that one. In hopes of this 150 or 160-inch buck, and that's happened a lot. I had one big buck. I hunted him for 2 years, and he was big. He was a mid 20-inch buck. He had he was a non-typical. He had probably 8-inch, 9-inch drop tines on each side, double drop tine. I mean, just a giant buck. He was in the mid 170s, and caught him on trail camera, several times, and I just could not find him in daylight, and ended up getting about a 132, 133 buck that walked under the tree stand, and it's hard to pass a blacktail like that, even knowing there is a big giant one around there. But after that year, I never saw that buck again. Never got him on trail camera. He just disappeared.
Huh. Now you're talking about some really world-class blacktails, but blacktail hunting, you're not gonna find 150s every day, and I guess the trophy is in the eye of the beholder. But what's a big blacktail to you, and what's a trophy blacktail, for the average person?
That's a really good question. And in the book, in my Trophy Blacktails book, I outline 6 different geographic regions of blacktails inhabit, and why I really think there should be 6 different categories within the record book for these deer, for categorizing their antler growth. And we do have now the bench legs, or the inland blacktail, the Cascade blacktail, whatever you want to call them. Those are the deer that have the ability to crossbreed with mule deer, and you can tell that in their antler configuration at higher elevations in the Cascades. So it's a good question you ask. There are places where I hunt in Northern California where if I'm going after a trophy buck, you don't even think of shooting a 140-inch buck. There's places I've hunted in Washington Washington, where you don't pass a 110-inch buck. So it's really kind of in the eyes of the beholder. One of the best blacktails that I've ever had the fortunate taking was up on the San Juan Islands, and he was a monster 3x3. That he was just a big buck, pushing 130 inches, for a 3-point. Got him with a bow. But it's all private land, of course, up there, and the people's land I had permission to hunt on. They've been hunting it for 3 generations, and they said that was the second biggest deer that they'd ever seen taken up there. And in that deer, we incidentally got him on the scales. The guy whose property I was hunting on, his grandfather was a certified butcher, and we got that deer on the scales within a half hour when it was killed, and it tipped the scales to 194 pounds. So
wow, that's a big buck.
It is. A lot of people think those San Juan bucks are like black labs with antlers, but you get a big buck that's able to reach its full maturity. You're talking 7, 8, 9 years old, and optimize its genetic potential. And there are a lot of deer. This deer that we're after down here now for 3 years, he's going to be tipping the scales close to 200 pounds too. So, and we're down here in the foothills of the Cascades where we're after this one. So it really depends. Where you're at geographically. Again, getting back to your question of what really constitutes a big buck. This year, my boy, he's killed, I don't know, 3 or 4 blacktails now, but we went in and he's like, Dad, I want to get a big buck, and we hunted a few days and didn't see a single deer, and then this 3-point pops out into a unit, and he's like, I want to shoot that one. I said, well, it's not very big. I don't care. It's a good deer. And I want to eat it. So so in our eyes, I mean, it was an average size, young 3-point, and that was for him in that situation, that was a heck of a deer. So I don't want to misportray what blacktail hunting is. I've been fortunate to hunt them for years, and our family has, and I just the challenge of finding a big buck. I don't really care if I kill one this year. If it's not the right buck, I'm not just going to shoot a smaller buck. We have meat in the freezer, and definitely we can use that meat, but at the same time, I really thrive on the challenges of trying to outwit these mature bucks.
Yeah, and if you want to kill a monster blacktail, I think you kind of got to hold out, because if you do see one, it's going to be the last hour of the last day, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Last year, my boy, the same one that got this 3-point this year, we were up. He had a youth tag up in the foothills of the Cascades, place I grew up hunting, and we've taken a lot of big bucks up there, a lot in the 140 class and bigger up there, and we were rattling, and it was just pouring down rain, rattling, actually just grunting. I didn't even get my rattle sequence started, and this 3-point just comes busting out of the brush and just sprints right up to us. I mean, beautiful throat, white throat patch, and just dark antlered thing, and good 4.5-year-old buck. And I said, do you want it? And boom, he shoots it. So, just pouring rain, and he double lungs it, so the thing runs off a little bit, and we start getting on the blood trail and following it and look up, and there's about 132-inch 4-point standing right there looking at us.
Wow.
So, it's a bittersweet, thing. I mean, he was just jacked with the thrill of calling that deer in and having it run right up to us, and then you look, okay, I could have waited for 30 seconds and shot a buck of a lifetime for a kid that age.
Yeah, well, hindsight's always 20/20, but So I got to ask you that you've hunted most of the species of blacktail. So which one's the real species? Because you hear this argument all the time that, well, that's a California blacktail. That's not a real blacktail. That's a bench leg. So which one's the real one?
Yeah. You do, the real ones are, technically the ones that are genetically identical. And believe it or not, if you're talking east of or west of I-5 in California, up into southern Oregon, and then there's a very distinct line that differentiates as you start getting into that tiller region where it dives into the forest land and then makes its way up through the Cascades, all the way up into Washington, and genetically. That's what really delineates what these deer are. And I've killed big blacktail in Northern California. I have a guide buddy down there, and they're 12-15 miles from the coast. There's as blacktail as any blacktail gets, and they've killed 3 or 4 this year over 150, one in the 170s, and people say those aren't real blacktail, and they're every bit as blacktail as what you're going to find on the Tillamook Oregon coast or the Washington coast or the valley floor. Again, they're different genetically, and the high proteins that these deer have in Northern California with acorns, they don't have a lot of the hunting pressure because of the private lands down there that we have, in Oregon and parts of Washington. So these deer are able to grow, and you talk to some of these people in this more open country, and they're watching these deer for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, before they pull the trigger on them. So they're local deer, they're non-migratory deer, and genetically speaking, they're all the same, and that's where it's hard to really convince a blacktail hunter the difference of them. And that's why when I wrote the book on trophy blacktails, it's hard as an author to figure out when to pull the trigger on to when to write a title, because you're always learning information. There's always something to learn, and as soon as that book goes to press, gosh, I should have included this, or I've learned this since that time. And that's one thing I wanted to do with this blacktail book, was hunt these deer in all of their habitats. So I had that personal firsthand knowledge, and it is a lot easier hunting them in the Northern California area because it's so open. Same with Southwest Oregon. But then at the same time, you get into some of the Southwest Oregon Coast Range, and it's every bit as big and rugged as the Rocky Mountains. So that's the unique thing about this species, and I don't like pitting what area or what region is better or bigger or harder or than the other one. They're all genetically the same, except for your bench leg deer, which can cross with the mule deer. But other than that, genetically speaking, they're the same.
So I guess for everyone who kind of doesn't understand the blacktail situation with bench legs, we have basically the the valley throughout Oregon, Washington, and into California, though it turns to mountainous down there. But basically to the east, we have mule deer, which is obviously a separate species. And in that middle ground there, that's where they're breeding in what most locals would call a bench leg, correct?
Yep, that's it. Bench leg is just another term for, like you say, a buck blacktail buck that has the potential to breed with a mule deer. Not saying they do, not saying they don't, but there are deer that live up on the Pacific Crest Trail. These deer might, one year in Central Oregon, for instance, spend the winter over in Sisters or near Redmond. Those same deer might cross over into the west side and be down, the McKenzie or Sandy M drainages. So these deer can move back and forth, and with that comes the ability to crossbreed. You get down a little bit lower elevations, not saying that they always do or they always don't. But you can easily tell sometimes when they have crossbred and sometimes not so easily.
Yeah, you see a lot of them that you don't necessarily look like the crossbreeds, and that's what's funny about the book, is that it's really defined not geographically, but by I-5 essentially. And so how is the blacktail book defined? Is it I-5?
Yeah, I-5, but then there's actually a part of Boone and Crockett where it tips in right about the Shady Cove area down in southern Oregon, and then it starts following a line within a national forest. So it stays west or east of I-5 for quite a while before you get into higher elevations, and then it comes back to I-5 in Washington. And that's interesting too. You could get into that whole debate with that and Roosevelt elk. That now we have the Cascade Roosevelt, but these deer can and they do cross I-5. You see big bucks killed every year on I-5. So it's kind of a hard genetic line to draw and to really put it to rest. They have DNA samples that are done before they submit them into record books if need be.
Yeah, that's always interesting. I never know how that works, but so you've hunted basically most of the species of blacktails. What have you learned throughout hunting all the various species in various regions?
that there's no substitute for time and persistence and patience. It's something where I've there are some bucks I have over 100 hours in hunting, knowing they're there, and I've never seen them. To go into an area, then again, I've gone in and, I'm right in the right spot and boom, you fill a tag, the opening morning. So the biggest thing I've learned is there's really no cut and dry formula to taking a blacktail. It's not like a mule deer, get to your high point glass, try to find them. This habitat is just so broken and so thick and so brushy that it's tough to consistently get on these deer the same way over and over. So to do that, I've really, diversified my approach and not been afraid to really, move and make mistakes. There'll be sometimes if the wind is good and there's a storm coming and I know that I'm right in a buck's, bedding area, if I can stalk in on him, it might take 6-7 hours to, cover 300-400 yards that day, just because I'm going through and just tediously looking for a deer, bedded up against ferns or, in vine maple under ferns. They can lay up and be incredibly small when they're balled up laying on the ground. I've watched them, bucks that I haven't wanted to shoot that are nice bucks, good mature bucks, 4 or 5 year old bucks that, you can see their antlers sticking up above ferns or a rock and you're walking right by them and they'll literally just lay their chin flat on the ground and let you walk right by, not knowing that, you saw the tops of their rack. So these deer are really, really keen, very aware of what's going on in their home area, and it's difficult to get on them. So, as far as what I've learned, I could write a whole nother book on that. That's kind of what I tried to share, in the Trophy Blacktails book, is just how different and how challenging these things are, and how hunters just need to adapt and be open-minded, letting the terrain and the situation of any given moment kind of dictate what your next move should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a million ways to skin that cat. And like you said, like it just depends on where you're at, what season it is, early season. But let's just do kind of the cliff notes and walk through some of your hunting strategies for various times of the year. Now, this is going to depend on a lot, like we talked about, whether it's a rifle, a bow, or a muzzleloader. But usually the hunting tactics are dependent on what time of the rut it is, which I guess depends on what weapon you're using. But let's walk through, like about now, I guess we get early season, we could say, the rifle, but pre-rut, and then kind of work through the different various times and kind of what you think your best strategy has helped you to get the success that you have.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to, again, geographic region. Some of the biggest bucks I've ever seen on the coast are right around that October 15th, 16th time frame when they're rutting hard. The rut on the coast is earlier than the valley or the Cascades. Seen a lot of big bucks taken that down there at that time of year. So, that's a good week, 10 days ahead of where I see a lot of bucks moving in the pre-rut in the valley floor and the Cascade foothills and even up higher. This year there were quite a few bucks, and a lot of people said, "Oh, the heat is, going to really delay the blacktail rut this year." I think this is probably the most aggressive blacktail rut that I've seen, and pre-rut that I've seen in probably 13, 14 years. A lot of deer out there moving, a lot of bucks relocating because they're being pressured by bigger bucks moving into the area. So, you have your densities of bucks that are going to, kind of establish a hierarchy based on age, and those insubordinate bucks are going to be forced to go somewhere else to find does to breed with because the big bucks are chasing them off. So I've seen quite a bit of that this year, early on, October 21st. 20th. Those are my favorite times to call and rattle during the pre-rut. You get a lot more aggressive responses during the pre-rut because that's when these bucks are sizing up the competition.
Really?
By the time the rut comes on, these deer, the bucks have already established their dominance. They know what does are in the area, so they're pretty much just sticking to the does and waiting for her to come in to heat. Now, that's not to say you're not going to get, an oddball, big aggressive buck that's just cruising around looking to breed a doe. That can obviously happen. That happened, I think with the last 3 bucks that my wife and I killed during the late archery season. We were looking for different bucks, and these other bucks, never seen them, never caught them on trail camera, nothing. They just happened to show up that day, looking for does to breed, and we stuck them. So I like the calling and rattling during the pre-rut. During the peak of the rut, in that pre-rut time, that's a rifle season. A lot of people don't realize that, I can be calling and rattling this time of year, and it's all about behavior, not it's not about what weapon you're hunting them with. So that's good, and I heard that's a good time to apply that, and I've heard quite a few people having really good success this year calling and rattling early.
So does your rattling strategy change between the middle of the rut and say pre-rut, like mid-October?
Yeah, it will. I'm not going to be, early on like this. I'm not going to be real heavy and aggressive. I'm going to be, because these deer aren't fighting heavy and aggressive. They will, shove each other around, but it's more just an attempt to kind of establish dominance by, walking around with your chest puffed out, so to speak. It's not a fight to the death like commonly happens during the rut. So, during that when I'm rattling, I'm, using, if it's not real windy or rainy out, I'm using natural, real antlers, and I'm just kind of tickling the ends of those antlers. Not to create an intimidating sound or one of, dominance being, established by a big buck, kicking a younger one's tail, but one of like, hey, we're smaller bucks, we're here, we're checking each other out, and then, hopefully a bigger buck will come in and say, hey, what are these guys doing in my territory? Because, the pre-rut is a time when these deer are covering the ground a lot more than they will during the rut, I believe. The bigger bucks we're talking
Really?
now, and that's because they're trying to size up again who's there. They want to know who their breeding competition is. And then I think, as you get into this peak rut time, which a lot of biologists say are, around the 7th to the 10th of November, that's a tough one there. I've wanted to write another book on hunting blacktails just on rattling them and calling, and that would pretty much focus on the rut. But I really think we don't know near as much as we think we do about the blacktail rut. I kind of equate it to salmon fishing. There's so much speculation that goes into, developing that perfect egg cure, perfect presentation that entices a salmon to bite. And, you can only speculate on what's going on because you can't see them. And it's kind of the same with the big blacktail. You can't, really see them a lot of times because it's so brushy. So I think the blacktail rut is a very misunderstood thing. I've rattled in blacktail literally every single month of November over the years, taken some of my best ones on December 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Later on. I don't usually get the big giant bucks to come in later, but you're going to get those, the insubordinate bucks in the area that are looking back to come back and breed a doe that maybe wasn't bred during her first estrus cycle.
So during the prime of the rut, now is rattling kind of your main strategy, or how much? And it kind of depends on weapon, obviously. But what's your main tactic to your go-to tactic for big bucks during the prime of the rut?
It kind of depends where you're at. If you're, low elevation private land or have trails pegged where, these deer are traveling, all I'm really caring about at that point is finding does. And you say, gosh, if there's a doe, there's a buck that's going to show up, and he is. But a black-tailed doe goes into heat once every 28 days, and her receptive time frame is only about 24 hours. So knowing that, and knowing that we have shortening daylight hours, really all I'm looking for right now are does, and I'm just hoping a big buck is with them. I should say now being late in the rifle season, and then as we move into muzzleloader and special draw and archery seasons in November, because the thought process there is as these does come into heat, there's going to be a buck or two or three that picks up on her right away, and the whole key is just being there when she goes into cycle. Now, at the same time, if I'm hunting up in the Cascades right now, I'm not just going to find does and just sit there and watch her all day. These bucks, a lot of them right now, I think in the deer, the smaller bucks that we've been seeing, and even some nicer bucks. I mean, we've been seeing some okay 3 and 4 points that we've been passing up here lately in hopes of finding these big deer that we're after. But during the pre-rut, these bucks were moving all over, and I was catching multiple bucks on a lot of different trail cameras. And now things have slowed down, and now we're seeing more big bucks laying out in units, feeding a little bit more, not so much chasing does right now. So I think there's a time period right after the pre-rut wanes where these bucks will go back to feeding, to conserving their body energy, to moving a little bit less than they were a week ago. because they know the rut's coming up, and they know that for the next month they're going to be losing a lot of body fat, and going to be fighting. And I've seen these things fight to the death. It's not just an arm wrestling competition and saying, okay, you get to breed this area. I've seen tines broke off in the face of these deer. I've seen them, die because they've been poked in the lungs. These big bucks lead a tough life. If they lived 6-7 years old, that's a pretty good accomplishment. Whereas a doe can easily live to 10-11 years old.
That's interesting. So how much does weather patterns and storms moving in and things like that adjust how you hunt during the rut?
The stormier, the better. I love it. I love hunting on the front end of a storm. I love hunting in absolutely heavy torrential downpours. I've seen so many deer out in the open during driving rainstorms. It's tough to hunt because you're getting wet, you're cold, you're covering ground, then you're sweating, then you're cold again because of that. It's hard glassing because it's raining so hard. But I've found these bucks to be most vulnerable and most approachable during this driving rain, especially if it's the first couple rains of the season. This big storm we had here earlier this week or last week, whenever it was now, you could just feel it coming. The temperature dropped, and we saw a lot of deer moving. We saw some good bucks, and does were just going crazy, and more does were dropping out of some higher elevations, moving down to lower elevations where there's greening up grass now because of the moisture that we've had. So deer are starting to move a little bit differently. If you can't get out during that driving rainstorm, getting out right afterwards is a very good approach. That next morning, when the storm lets up, if that happens, I usually try to get higher in elevation and try to hunt my way down, wait for the thermals to shift, and then I'll hunt my way down, trying to meet a deer as he's coming up. And the reason I do that is because I think a lot of the windstorm knocks down a lot of lichens and mosses, and there's a lot of protein and nutrients in those things that the deer don't get very often, and especially as dry as it's been all summer and early fall. Now these things get a little bit of moisture in them. They taste good for these deer, and they crave them. So these things have been knocked down in rainstorms and windstorms, and so I'll just kind of slowly hunt my way down through the timber and try to find these deer feeding. They'll get up a lot of times and feed during the mid morning, or they might take 2 or 3 hours to reach their bed, just kind of feeding as they go.
So how much of that during the daytime are you seeing bucks versus, we talked about a lot of those big bucks get killed the last 5 minutes. How much of the full daytime are you hunting, and how much success have you found with hunting all day?
If it's a stormy situation, I'll hunt all day, and we've killed, a lot of bucks, between 10 and 2 o'clock. That especially as you get into the end of the pre-rut and early rut, where these things are chasing does all night long or checking out bucks, I think they kind of get sidetracked and don't feed as much during those nighttime periods, and therefore they're active more I guess consistently during the day. So over the years, we've killed a lot in that morning time frame. As you get in more the peak of the rut, where these bucks, especially the big bucks, have their little core area where they're breeding the does that are in their specific location, I've had better success killing those big bucks or seeing them right at that end of dark time frame. And again, I think that's because these big bucks, they know that there are a lot of does. They could cover a lot of land, they could burn a lot of calories, they could fight more bucks. But I think that a lot of these wiser bucks are content knowing that, okay, I'll breed these 10 does in this area instead of risk injury or leaving an area to breed another doe and then having a buck come into my area that that's going to breed the does that I've been keeping my eye on here for the last few weeks. So and a lot of that can be, again, based on the geographic region that you're hunting in. The core area of a blacktail in the Coast Range is going to be a lot different than these foothill bucks in the Cascades that are going to drop down in elevation 1,200-1,500 feet to breed does and then go right back up to where they were once the breeding season's over. So a lot of it just comes down to what area you're hunting. I've hunted bucks in the Willamette Valley where, literally, I'm hunting the area the size of a football field, and I know there's a big buck in there. But you talking the Willamette, you're talking private property, so you don't want to push deer off of the property that you have permission to hunt, and hopefully they, fearing, I guess, that they go somewhere else and don't come back. So that's kind of a cat and mouse game altogether. But it kind of comes back to the question you asked earlier about, hunting deer in all these different habitats. And really how I go about hunting them just depends so much on the deer that we're after and what's happening within those little micro habitats.
So with the microhabitats and the big mountains, I mean, you kind of done a little bit of both, but how is hunting, a single blacktail? Like, seems like most of the time you're hunting one big buck. How has that strategy changed versus, when you don't know an area or don't know a buck in an area, so you're just hunting an area? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So if I'm going up high, if I'm going up to that 3,500, 4,000 foot elevation mark later in the season to find deer on the move, then you're looking for just about any, deer you can find. I don't have trail cameras set up that high right now. I don't have time to go and check those regularly. So I'm basically going in, if I'm hunting high elevations in the Cascades, I'm going into spots that that I can set up in glass. If I'm walking the forest, I want to slow hunt the thing. I'm looking for does. I'm looking for animals that are migrating down maybe. Because of weather, we're starting to get some pretty good, cold temperatures and bad weather up high pretty early this year, which could make for an excellent muzzleloader and late rifle tag holders, and especially for the archery guys. So, up there, I'm just still hunting my way through the woods looking for deer, signs of deer, and deer on the move, and trying to find trying to take the first good deer I can find.
Yeah, versus when you're on, say, Willamette property and you have a particular buck you're looking for.
Yeah, where I might say, okay, it's him or nothing, and you hunt for 2 years and never see him.
That's blacktail hunting.
Yeah.
So moving into like our later seasons, we kind of hit the prime of the rut right about now, and you kind of give us some good tips on how to fill that tag. For the guys who have a little bit later tags, what's your strategy? Are you going back to calling and rattling from a certain particular point? Are you moving? What's your later strategies?
Later on, I'll get a little more aggressive than I am during the peak of the rut, and that's because I think, again, during that peak rut, these deer are focused on breeding the does that they know are right there. As you get into that second archery season, and it depends where you're hunting, but say the week of Thanksgiving, that's probably my favorite time to hunt blacktails. We haven't killed our biggest bucks at that time, but you see a lot of good, big bucks at that time, and I think that's these does are coming out of their first estrus cycle, the ones that may have been missed being bred. Maybe they're coming into heat about that time. So I do a lot of calling and rattling at that time. Usually we've got quite a bit of bad weather. Usually the forest floor is pretty wet. If it's raining or blowing, I like rattling. I'll go to synthetic, a synthetic rattle bag at that time. I like using a synthetic rattle bag that's all plastic with no wood in it, because if it gets wet, it can sound a little bit clunky. I really like that sharp tone, that high pitch that penetrates the wood and the woods, I should say, and cuts through the foliage and travels in the wind and the wet weather. So a lot of people say, "Gosh, it doesn't sound as good as real antlers," and it doesn't to me either. But there's something about it that the deer like, and I've just had a lot of success with that rattle bag during that late time. I'll also take before I set up and rattle at that time, I'll take a pile of sticks, about the size of your thumb or whatever. I'll just get a big bundle of them, and I'll set them up where I'm going to be rattling, break them all off and set them up right where I'm going to be rattling. And as I continue through my rattling sequence, I might be there for 20 minutes. I might be there for 2 hours. It depends where I'm at, what kind of sign I'm seeing. But I'll be breaking those limbs, and I'll be crashing them. I'll be kicking the ground and stomping the ground. I'll be raking trees. And when I'm done, if I'm in an area like that for half hour, 45 minutes, I mean, I'm honestly, sweating when I'm done with that rattling session there. It's not a real timid thing for me. I'll start out timid in case there's a deer really close, but I really want to try to reach out and cover as much ground as I can. And to do that, I really want to simulate a real knockdown, drag out fight. And if you've ever seen a blacktail fight, there's, with mature bucks, there's nothing quiet or submissive about it.
Really? So what's your sequence? Are you starting out with a grunt, or are you kind of just going to the rattle bags? Like, walk us through a little bit of your sequence.
So ideally, it just kind of depends on the sign that I'm seeing. Last year with my son's buck, we were on a very heavily traveled public road up up about 2,000, 2,500 feet elevation in the Cascades, and everyone was just driving by, and I was looking. It was just a torrential downpour, but there were these muddy deer tracks going everywhere across the road. I mean, it was just phenomenal. And I don't know if it was the bad weather that no one wanted to get out, but you could tell there was a high concentration of does in the area, and there was a lot of that red mud, that's on the side of the logging roads, and these deer tracks were just caked with this. And so I told my boy, I said, we're going to go right into that thick reprod, and it was literally hands and knees for the first 20, 30 yards to get in there, and then it opens up, and there were just deer everywhere in there. And for that, because there was so much sign, and I knew those tracks were fresh because it was raining so hard, I said, we're just going to start off with a couple light grunts, then we're going to do some really, really light rattling, and then we'll just get a little more loud and aggressive, because as many tracks are here, these deer might be close. And I mean, I grunted 2 times, literally within 20 seconds, and that deer came on a dead run, right at us, and was looking right at us. So in that situation, I started off timid, even though it was windy and rainy and so forth. But I looked at the sign around and saw, that okay, there's a lot of deer right here, and they could be really close to us. Other times, if I go into an area and I'm confident there are bucks around, but I'm not sure how close they are, I'll start off timid like that. I'll rattle, usually fairly quietly, and most of the time I'll take a rattle bag and my real antlers, so I can use both. And usually I'll start off with just a real soft rattling sequence in case there's something real close. Not real intimidating. I don't want to run these deer off because again, late in the season, I don't think, I haven't had good luck calling in the biggest of the big bucks. You're getting good mature bucks, but not the giant ones. So I don't want to intimidate those bucks thinking that, okay, there's a giant buck here, and now he's coming to, he's kicking this guy's hind end over here. So I better get out of here. So I want to simulate more of an insubordinate buck presence, with the hopes of piquing their interest for them to come in and take a look at what's going on. So I'll start off light, rattle for 30, 45 seconds, sit, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Just depends on what the wind is doing, what direction I think the deer come from, and then I'll repeat it again, and maybe just a touch louder the next time, and then the next time. And if I'm working a ridge line, which I love working horizontal ridges this time of year, because a lot of these bucks late in the year, because a lot of these bucks will get on those horizontal ridges and run them for a mile or two, even more. And this is something that I've found to be true, especially late in the season, where these bucks are covering a lot more ground, because they know, that maybe there was only one doe miss being bred here, but there's another one, a mile and a half away that may have been miss being bred too. So they know that a smaller percentage of the does in their area are not going to be bred like they were during the peak of the season. So I'll cover those horizontal ridges. And if I have a good ridge to rattle out, for a mile, 2, 3 miles or something like that, I might move every 20 minutes at that point, just moving into the wind, rattling. If the wind changes, I get out of there. I stop right away, because you're never going to fool a blacktail's nose, ever.
Yeah. That's always the tough part, is blacktail will almost inevitably circle around downwind from you if you're calling. So, I try to use like a unit or a cut or a clear cut or an open area that he's not going to travel through. So, like you said, and try to use that. But it seems like blacktails almost every time will circle around.
Yeah, they do. And, they don't come in as aggressively as an elk, or I shouldn't say less cautious. Elk are obviously cautious, but they definitely seem to oftentimes, kind of weigh the situation and assess what's going on before they come in. Then again, when I rattled in my first deer, gosh, I was a freshman in high school. So whatever year, 1979, I had no clue what I was doing. Saw a guy do it on TV with whitetails, called my buddy, and we went out after football practice one evening, said, let's try this. So I grabbed an old set of white clunky antlers, mule deer antlers, that I think my grandma put in the garden in 1935 or something. And, we were out there standing in the open, had no clue what we were doing. I hit the things together. They sound like a couple of loaves of wet bread. And here comes this forked horn running right out at us. And my buddy shoots it. And later that evening, I rattle in, still today, one of the biggest 4-points I've ever seen. And I just couldn't get a shot at him. Of course, I was young and didn't know what I couldn't get away with them. But that was a really big buck. So, here we were not knowing what we were doing, but the timing was right at that point. And it brought the deer in. So, probably one of the biggest words of encouragement I have is to move with confidence. Make a decision and go with it. I see so many people, contemplating when to make a move and, second guessing what their thoughts are. Just play the wind, like you said. These things, these deer are always going to be using the wind, so try to set up in a spot where you can get them when they're trying to cross to get downwind from you. Uh,
Yeah.
and if you sense something is going wrong, then back out of there. You don't want to educate that deer. At the same time, I've been incredibly aggressive a lot of times, especially in the world of TV where my time is so limited, where we're going on, sometimes 40, 50 hunts a year. So I, where you're having to get kills, so quickly or in such a short time period, I should say. I've been very, very aggressive. One thing I have found is that if you're hunting these deer in any blacktail that I've found, once I spook them out, and it happens, I've done it a lot by being too aggressive. Usually within 3 days, that big buck is right back in his core area. So if you screw up, don't give up faith, but don't go in there, again and again and again. Give it a few days, and he'll come back.
So on that note, when you're hunting these areas, now a lot of this has to do with the time you say, you have, whether you're traveling to do this, but in general, are you hunting the same area kind of over and over and over and feeling like you're covering that area or that buck really well? Or are you kind of going to different areas and not spending too much time in an area? Because I feel like sometimes if I'm in an area too much, it's going to get scented up. It's going to get, spook the does, this, that, and the other thing. Are you kind of moving around or sticking to one spot?
That just really depends on the wind. And there's this one buck we're after here. Evenings are my favorite time this time of year to try to kill a big buck. And for the last 2 days, not yesterday, but the day before that and the day before that, I could not get into where these trails are that this buck is using. And that was hard because, the season ends Friday here in Oregon for adults. We have a youth who will be able to hunt through the weekend, our other son here. So, we have a few days left, but I know that if I push it and this buck is bedding on private property and then crossing over into the area where I can hunt. So I know exactly where he is, and it's one of those things where you're exactly right. I don't want to push it and risk spooking him and making him become even more nocturnal. So we didn't even get to hunt that buck twice earlier this week, and it's just killing me because he's a good sized buck. So a lot of it depends. A couple weekends ago, the whole family, we were down in southern Oregon trying to find some deer. It's an area that I haven't hunted a whole lot. Seeing a lot of does, no sign of the pre-rut whatsoever down there. I set some trail cameras out, didn't get a single buck on trail camera, saw a ton of does, and I can guarantee if I'd have seen that many does in this area, this time of year and up here where I live outside of Eugene, up in the foothills on the McKenzie River, we'd have seen a lot of bucks with it. So we had 4 or 5 days planned to hunt down there. It was warm. It was just a gut feeling. It wasn't right. So we aborted and came back here, to hunt. So you're looking at a, 4-hour drive down there and camping and, being prepared to hunt a deer down there. But the feeling just wasn't right. So we left, and now we're concentrating on these deer back up here.
Yeah. You just got to stick with your gut, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So for those who kind of want to go on a blacktail hunt, it's kind of it's a big step for a lot of people who don't grow up around blacktail hunting. What's your recommendation for what area to start looking at as far as what type of blacktails, and what's a traditional blacktail hunt to you?
A lot of it depends, when people, want to hunt. If you're new to it and you just want to go out and try to kill a blacktail, the coast is hard to beat. There are a lot of deer down there. It's brushy country, so that's hard. It's pretty big country. It can be intimidating for someone who hasn't hunted them, but you can usually see a lot of deer in those logged units. Of course, there are a lot of changes going on now with logging companies and closing gates and charging fees to get in, and hunting has changed a lot over the years, and that's one thing. People look at a lot of the big blacktails that our family has mounted that we've taken over the years. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the general rifle season in Oregon, went to mid to late November. So, a lot of these old timers wouldn't even start hunting until mid-November, and that's when a lot of these big giant blacktails were killed because of the rut. So, as we've wised up to the biological, lifestyle of the blacktail, and seasons have changed to kind of keep them going, as a species, that, the hunting opportunities have changed. So, people say, gosh, it's not as good as it used to be. And man, put some trail cameras out there. I've been catching more bucks and bigger bucks in the last 3 years than I've seen in probably 30 years out here. So the deer are there. So don't get discouraged. That's what makes blacktail hunting so difficult. But if it was me, I'd be going there. The Cascades are another great spot. There's a lot of good public land, in the Cascade foothills, that 1,500 to 2,000 foot elevation range in Oregon. You're getting up to about 3,000 elevation in feet elevation in Washington. If you're going a little bit later in the rifle season, now with this cold weather, I know we had some temperatures up in the Cascades the last couple nights into the 20s. That would be a really good spot to go right now, up high. This cold weather, in biological studies, trail cam studies have shown that, these deer right around the 4,000 foot mark, those are the ones that start moving first, and kind of the most aggressively. So, if you're a late archer or there are a couple hunts that start this weekend, actually, special tag holders. And if you're a youth tag holder still, this weekend would be a really good time to get up to a higher elevation. So, those are all good places to start. There's a lot of good public land opportunity there. If you want to go a little more hardcore and you do have private land to hunt, I should say hardcore in terms of trying to focus on finding a big buck, then start doing your scouting in July, early July, all through August, and you'll be amazed how many deer you're going to see. Those same deer are going to be in the same area during hunting season. It's just interesting to see how many are there in the summer when they're out in velvet.
Yeah, and actually, you can actually see them then.
Yeah, exactly. I see more deer during that time than you do during the rut. A lot of people say, gosh, I don't, see any deer until the rut. I actually see way more in velvet. Mm-hmm. Out in the open when I'm scouting in the summer, and those deer aren't going anywhere. They're going to be, within a mile or so of where you're going to be hunting them, come hunting season. Unless, of course, it's a late migratory thing, but not many of us are scouting up at, 5,000 feet in the summer.
Yeah, unless you're looking for something else, looking for elk.
Yeah, that's right.
So where can we find out more about blacktail hunting? I know you got a great book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and where we can find it?
The book, it's available in a lot of stores. It's Cabela's is carrying it now. It's online. I have it on my website. It's just my name, scotthaugen.com. It was, culmination of a lifetime of hunting these deer, and the family grew up hunting them. My side of the family started hunting them here in Oregon in the 40s. My wife's side of the family homesteaded this whole area down here in Walterville, Milliken area, over in Eastern Oregon. It's the same family, and they homesteaded this area near Walterville, who's actually named after Walter Milliken, in the mid 1800s. So they've been hunting blacktails since that time, and it's been neat, being raised in a culture of blacktail hunters. I've been fortunate to hunt, all around the world for a lot of exciting game animals. I mean, lions and Cape buffalo and red stag and mountain goat and moose and sheep, and I honestly think the toughest big game animal, a mature animal to get in North America is a good trophy class blacktail. They're tough. So that's the premise of what the book was written on. I was a former science teacher for 12 years with a biology background before getting into the outdoor industry full time. So a lot of the book is written on the scientific year-round behavior of deer, hoping people will learn something on the behavior of the deer, and then there are hunting tips that are included within that.
Yeah, and it's a great resource, and it's funny that you say that, because I feel like the people who are very addicted to blacktail hunting are the ones that kind of grew up with it, and I don't know why we still like doing it, because it's one of those things where your success level is so small that I who knows why people who grow up blacktail hunting absolutely love it, but I think they're the only ones.
Yeah, and there aren't many of us, and I've been fortunate to hunt with a lot of great people around the world, and the best hunters that I've hunted with, as far as woodsmanship skills, hunting skills, being able to read nature and see what's going on with nature and animals and animal behavior, are the people that cut their teeth blacktail hunting. It's challenging, boy. It's not just hanging up a tree stand and sitting and waiting for them to come under you into a food plot type of thing. It's you're talking thousands and thousands of square miles of habitat that's greatly varied, and they can all be hunted differently, and how you hunt them one day might change the next or the following week, depending on their behavior.
Yeah. If you're gonna hunt blacktails, make sure you read up on Scott's book. And you got a new resource I want to tell everyone about, and kind of some more hunting information. Tell us about the new website.
Thanks. We do. Yeah, it's called Outdoors Now, and it's all advertising free. There's no subscription to it. There's no sponsors. There's no billboards. Nothing. It's all just information. And over the years of doing TV and writing, I don't know, we're get over 1,800 magazine articles now, and all the books. And it's like, we're sitting on all this information, and what can we do, to help get it out there? It's just sitting there. So all the hunting, fishing, outdoor stuff we've done, cooking. My wife, Tiffany, is a big part of the cooking side of things. Of course, she writes for a lot of different magazines and has written several books on the topic. So we thought, what can we do? So a few years ago, a man by the name of Nick Skreptis, he's just a genius with computers and everything technical that I have no clue about. He said, hey, I think we could team up. He said, you have information that I could capitalize on. And he said, I can help you. And he said, let's just create a website business that gives free information. And I thought, okay, that sounds good. And 3 years later, I said, okay, so tell me more about this. So it took a while. I set aside TV. This is the first year I haven't been out filming TV shows for the first time in 15 years. So the time was right, and how we're going to eventually make money on this thing is just by click and buys. But it's a non-pressured thing. It's basically just information where people can go out and learn things. We actually just launched it last night. People can go on and look at videos now, read content. There's a lot of stuff to look at now. We're still adding content. We have no products up there right now, other than last night we kind of kicked it off with the launch of a feed line that we've been working on for about 3 years called Deer Now, and it's something that I've worked on hard with blacktails, and we could do a whole nother hour-long discussion on trying to get blacktails into feed and food sources and so forth. A lot of guys do it, not a lot of guys talk about it, but I think that's because there's so much to learn. But we were working with a really good feed company, putting together a high-quality food source that I've never seen anything like it before. Worked for blacktails and in all the areas that they live in. So we're excited about that, and that's available now on Outdoors Now, and that site will just keep continuing to grow in coming months.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic that we could dive into, because I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. I have not had much success with it, and it does vary on products, because you'll hear guys say, this worked perfectly or this didn't. But yeah, like you said, that's great information. Is there something, stuff we can read about in literature on that product on your website?
Yeah, we have it there. It's called Deer Now. It's the blacktail attractant, and it's outdoorsnow.com is the name of the site. So you can go there, and on the home page on the bottom right, you'll have it there. And we're giving away a free blacktail book, a $20 value for anyone who clicks and orders that thing here over the next couple weeks. So yeah, that's there. There's other videos. There's other written content on blacktail deer on there that people can just go on and click on and start watching and start reading.
Well, awesome. Look forward to checking it out. And thanks again for chatting with us, Scott.
Hey, thank you. Good luck. And if anyone picks up any deer off of this podcast because of the tips, drop me an email with some pictures. I'm always excited to see results in the field.
Thanks again, Scott, so much. And hopefully you get some success in the closing days of season here.
Hey, hope so. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
All righty, Scott. Have a good one. Hey guys, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show and maybe even picked up a few tips along the way. Join us right here every Thursday morning for more interviews and great hunting tips. And be sure to help us out by leaving a review on iTunes. For more information about this show and the rest of our guests, check out the show notes for links and additional resources on our website, www.therichoutdoors.net. This episode is brought to you by GameCallSupply.com, the online authority in hunting calls. GameCallSupply.com not only has everything you need to call elk, deer, ducks, predators, turkeys, whatever your hunt of choice is. They're obsessed with calling animals and have all the resources you need to become a better caller and a better hunter. With great prices and fast shipping, you'll have your calls in no time and be on your way to your hunting stand. Check them out and use the Rich Outdoors Podcast special offer code TRO to get 15% off your entire order.